a lot of people when we started and just leave that open.
So what you're
Yeah.
saying is they were planning to leave anyway, but you guys were so amazing that they hung around a little longer.
I like
Yeah,
that
they got out of
interpretation.
there. We'll take it. Yeah, that's good old days.
That was a
David,
busy con.
where was the lumber business you were involved in?
So we, I still lived in Portland, but I had most of my wood came out of the Midwest, and so I had a lumber yard set up, consolidation yard set out outside of Chicago, and so we'd buy old barns and bring them into there, clean the wood, and ship it mainly Southern California.
Okay, nice.
Well, that's a discussion we haven't had on a Friday. We're talking about wood.
Well, Alex and I were sharing our Alex's
Passion for wood.
passion for wood, for hardwood. So, yeah, we were keeping it PG, but yeah, no, it was those were the wild days. The other interesting thing about that time in business was that the Michigan economy was so bad during that time. This was like 2006, 2007, 2008. That
real estate crash.
You would just run into the biggest con men in Michigan, because if you just get out of jail and you can't get money, but you're good with like equipment and you can talk someone into taking a barn down, and you can sell it for 50 grand, it just attracted the shadiest characters.
Really interesting. Alex has got all of his wood tools.
Yeah. Well, I really can't stand waste, and we've got a lot of trees in our yard. So when they fall over in storms, I got tired of making firewood one day and said, you know what, let's do something a little more fancy.
Let's make a chair.
Yeah, let's start with a desk.
Do you get a lot of do you cut for clear when you cut, Alex, or do you just cut for like highest yield?
No, I take whatever nature decides to knock over.
But when you're slicing it up, will you if you don't like waste, that means you just cut for yield, huh? You just try to get.
Sorry, I should have given you that warning, David. You were talking.
Well, now I want to know the answer to this question.
So, do I cut for clearing or cut for yield?
No, yeah, like do you cut for clear lumber? Are you like positioning the log to get nice clear lumber, or you just slicing it up?
Yeah, no, it's because I get to use it, and I don't have to sell it to anybody or whatever. It's like whatever 4-inch to 2-inch thick things I can pull out of a tree. That's what I aim for.
Was Bob Vila going to join this call?
You're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. I built some IKEA furniture over the weekend. That's about the extent of my my building furniture skills.
Hey, you got to have some skill to do that.
You like my jacket, by the way? I put this on just for you, Jeff.
I see that. Yeah. I see that. God, the moment that was announced, I was thinking about you, man. I was like, shit.
Yeah. Good people
John came
there
here for the gardening tips.
Yeah, nice.
John needs all the help in that area he can get.
Life skills, man.
So are you?
So
I don't missing Vroom, Ryan?
Yeah, that was my question.
I had a good opportunity to connect with some folks that I worked there with, and we kind of all shared the same sentiment. There are some good people there, and I was really glad to see that the Car Story brand stays on. Just by way of quick explanation, I ended up at Vroom through acquisition, so I never thought I would be there, but I met some great people while I was there. But a lot of that core team that was Car Story is still there and going to persist on, and some of the data related endeavors that they had around deploying AI and discovering what options are actually on a vehicle based on more than just a window sticker. And so lots of cool predictive analytics they were doing around pricing, and that was some of the reason that we were acquired. But yeah, I mean my feelings on Vroom are kind of mixed because you guys know me. I've been around Refresh for a while. One of the things I'm most excited about talking about is how awesome the dealers are in this community and how they really are, the pillars of their own communities, and they go out of their way to do philanthropic efforts. And there's just 100 different examples a minute of the things that dealers do to elevate their communities and provide jobs for those around them. And so my first month on the job at Vroom, I saw a preview of the infamous Super Bowl commercial that ended up playing that made the rounds on Refresh as well. And so that was tough for me, quite honestly. And I had a call with my boss, and I said, this is hard. Like, this does not represent the people that I know and the people I've been presenting about in conferences for the last 3 years. So that part was hard, but again, good people. And I think that through the time I was there that year, we did make some measurable impact on changing that narrative from dealers are the bad guys to, we're playing in the same sandbox as everybody else. So no regrets. It was a good experience, but it was a little hard to see. I think with a little more time, and they just kind of ran out of time and money, I think, to course correct on some of the things that got them to where they were. So the takeaway.
When Vroom acquired Car Story, didn't they reel that in and they weren't selling it to dealerships anymore?
We still had some enterprise level agreements, so it wasn't necessarily dealer related at that time, but we still had a function. It was, like anything, it's just part of working in the community. You see some businesses come and go, and you go through acquisitions. And so I think in this particular case, the takeaway for me was, man, Vroom and Carvana and some of the others did a good job of elevating that consumer experience online. I mean, the way we presented a vehicle and merchandised, I think you can attribute some of the changes that we've made across the industry to the impact of some of those disruptors, which is something I know we're going to talk a little bit more about as we get into today's topic around, data access and availability of data and what integration actually means. So, thanks for letting me talk for a second about it. But good folks there. I know there are some good people that are looking for opportunities, and I would just encourage the dealer community not to steer away from somebody because of a name. There are some great folks in that organization. So if you have an opportunity to hire them, reach out to them.
Cool.
Yep. Well, thank you, Ryan. And David, your second time on Refresh Friday, I believe.
Yeah, it might even be. I was trying to think about it. It might even be my third time, maybe. I feel like I've seen you guys a lot. I mean, I watch some of your stuff, so I feel like I know you guys personally. But no, it's great to be here. I think it's exciting. I think we're at like NADA is going to be interesting this year. I think we're at a real interesting time in the world, right? We're in a technological moment here that at least is the most interesting technological moment in the last 20 years and possibly 50. I think it's getting misunderstood as because Chat GPT and generative AI kind of opened up our eyes to it. But I think that the moment is that there's an opportunity for massive efficiencies to gain using a lot of the tools that are now coming out in mass. I think the problem automotive has is they are relatively locked out from those efficiencies unless they solve the data problem. So I think
we just pay for it, right?
And just paying for it is actually not the problem, because when you just pay for it, I mean, we can get into it, but when you just pay for it, the certified interfaces that are available are so incomplete that if you are relying on those, your systems are not going to work as intended. And I think Alex, you're a woodworker, right? I always think of this woodworking story I have when I first learned how to build furniture. I was trying to teach myself how to build furniture. I didn't know how to use my hands at all. And I was doing it in my garage, and it was like a disaster. I was basically almost losing an eye, my fingers. I was not doing a good job. And so I signed up for a class at Oregon College of Arts and Crafts, furniture building. And they gave me a list of things. They sent out an email like, hey, bring a square, paper, a ruler, this set of different things you had to bring to your first day class. So I went to Home Depot. I get a square, spend like $8 on it. And I go in, and First day of class, the teacher's like, raise your hand if you have a square. I'm diligent. I'm proud of myself. I did everything. He's like, raise your hand if you got your square at Home Depot. I raised my hand up. He takes my square, he goes over to my square and he throws it in the trash. And he's like, your square will not build furniture for you. And he picks it out, he takes it out of the trash and he holds up his square, which was like probably, I think at the time, maybe $110. And you can see when he holds his square up to mine that my square is not a perfect 90 degrees. And he's like, if you try to build furniture with this thing, you will be wondering forever why your furniture is not level, is not working, everything's not coming together. And I think about that with automotive and data, is that because dealers don't understand, because they don't have the access to the data they need, everything that's getting built in automotive is like building with a Home Depot square. It's slightly off. It sort of under delivers. It's not doing what it can. I can go through a million different examples of this. And so, what's exciting though is like, I think there's really two problems. There's a legal problem and there's a technical problem. Like on the technical problem, like I think companies like FourEyes, we've solved that. We've gotten through that. That's no problem. Like getting the data out of these systems. The legal problem is that there's still an ownership gap where there's still, vendors are still asserting ownership in different ways. And like you look, there's 5 states now that have passed laws against doing this. Those laws are on the verge of being enforced much more. Arizona is sort of the gold standard. You guys know the Arizona dealer law?
Yeah, a little.
I don't. Fill me in.
It's actually fantastic, and it's on our website. So if you go to FourEyes.io and you go to learn, there's data rights resources. We actually we have one document that has all of the state laws rolled up, and because they're hard to find, and in one PDF document. But the Arizona dealer data law basically says that any vendor, any system can't, what do they call it? Like basically like CRMs, DMSs, and they name them by name, can't withhold data. And they actually name it cyber ransom. And I'll read you their definition of cyber ransom because it's good. And they say basically cyber ransom means to encrypt, restrict, prohibit, or attempt to encrypt, restrict, prohibit a dealer's authorized integrators access to the dealer data for monetary gain. And so cyber ransom is not just charging. People think it's just, charging for data. It's also restricting access to the dealer's data, because that's another form of asserting control, right? If a vendor won't give access to the data, then Jeff, you're stuck using certain tools that only do give access, right? So withholding access is a form of cyber ransom. Data loses value over time. So if you notice a lot of these interfaces, we're going to send it to you every day. We're going to send it to you and it's unreliable. Well, the data is much less valuable over time. So now, like if you're trying to build a tool that's, upselling F&I, for example, well, you can't find out the people that are moving into finance until on a daily feed. You should know the second somebody moves into finance, you should know that they've moved in. And so that, what happened, if we look back in June, what happened, and I think Comply Auto was a leader, and there was a lot of leadership, and NADA, and a lot of leadership around data retention policies and getting vendors to sign data retention policies that advocate how they were retaining data and how they were holding on to data in order to comply with a lot of the new regulations. Well, dealers should step up and do the same thing with data ownership, which is we all follow CCPA, whether or not we're dealing with in California. Well, dealers should step up and say, hey, I want you following Arizona dealer law, whether or not I'm in Arizona. And by the way the Arizona dealer law is written, if you are a group and you have one dealer in Arizona, you could actually insist that the vendor has to follow that for all of your dealers. Well, now You look at a big group that's going to assert that. If a big group asserts that, they now have a competitive advantage, a huge competitive advantage. And so in getting access to their data, and I'll give you a a real-time example that we were just looking at, if it's helpful. So most certified interfaces for CRMs don't provide notes out of the CRM. And there's some technical reasons why they don't, right? One of the reasons they don't is that it can be a big field, it can be a lot of communication, it can be a lot of data transfer, but if you go into a certified interface, they don't provide notes. So like what happens is if you're building an AI tool and this is kind of the Home Depot square, if you have an AI tool, the only piece of information you get, for example, is, they were looking at a Ram truck. But what you're missing in that is they really care about the tow package because they're towing a boat. What you're missing with the website activity is, God, they really care a lot about aesthetic because they're really only looking at black and charcoal gray. And so now you program this AI engine to talk to the user, but it doesn't have all the information. It only has that you were looking for a Ram truck. It has no memory that you were looking for a boat because it didn't get that in the notes. It got very limited information. So now it's back to that bad shopping experience that people have with auto dealers already, where they have no institutional memory. And so it's talking about things that aren't relevant to the user. And so you compare that, like, this is why, like, I think automotive is primed to be disrupted if it doesn't solve the data problem, because you look at other experiences that can be built. And, Ryan and I were talking about, like, you look at Vroom, Carvana, Shift Technologies, right? People were scared a little bit, and it seems like, okay, they've kind of won the battle. There were lots of people competing to be the next Amazon before Amazon came out. I think that disruption in automotive, we still don't know the name of the company that's going to disrupt auto. And it's highly disruptable if we just don't solve the data problem.
It's funny. Think back to when DealerTrack was getting started. What was the other company that competed with DealerTrack for loan approvals? And they ended up with Toyota and Ford exclusively.
I have guesses, but I don't want to be wrong.
Yeah, it's bugging me. I can't remember the name of them, but they were a superior product. And DealerTrack, as far as tech goes, wasn't on their level at that time. But the DealerTrack was more open to working with other companies. And these guys took the approach of, no, we're going to go our own. We're going to do this on our, not provide access and all that kind of stuff. And look what happened. We can't even remember their name. and DealerTrack ended up selling for $4 billion to Cox. So
was it Route 1?
Route 1, yeah. That's it. I think they're changing their tune now, but if they had jumped on that openness train from the get-go, DealerTrack probably wouldn't have eaten their lunch.
Well, and what's interesting too, outside of automotive, there's a huge category called integrators. Like FourEyes is technically an integrator. We bring all the data together. Authenticom functions as an integrator. In automotive, it's really small because the integrators have to fight so much they're just battling legally just to stay in business. But what's happened because there's not integrators in automotive is that you're stuck with, like, building with incomplete data, and the whole industry, like, you look at it, you have inflated cost because you have you don't have the right competition, right? Like, Alex, we were talking about, I call it the $11 problem, where there's a lot of things in automotive that cost $2,000 a month that cost $11 outside of automotive. But it's because they can't connect to the data and do that, right? Like, even simple things like, using MailChimp, right? Hey, I want to send out an email. I'm just going to send out. Well, you can't get it connected into your CRM to be able to have good two-way communication. And so you end up spending $2,000 with a vendor to do an inferior application that costs you $7 a month. And
Jeff, Alex, do you guys think the dealer community is aware of that kind of hidden cost of integrations to the products and things that they buy, or do you think that's common knowledge, or is that something that we don't know about or don't talk about?
I'm going to let Jeff answer that question, but first I want to say I think they're aware, but I don't think they understand.
Yeah, and I don't think they're not aware to what degree. Yeah.
Well, one thing too that's interesting with the model of Arizona, the Arizona dealer law specifically says that you can't profit off of your fees, right? So they can't be profit
Hmm.
centers for you. And not only that, they have to be disclosed. So you can't have these backdoor agreements that basically mask the cost everywhere.
Well, they all have that. How are they how are they enforcing that?
Well, so what's interesting, the Arizona dealer data law went into effect a few years ago. CDK and Reynolds challenged it. They lost in
Of
court.
course.
Yeah, they lost in court, and so now it's been in effect, but it hasn't actually been. What's interesting, it hasn't been enforced yet. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
in 2024 we're going to start seeing dealers who are waking up and going, "Wait, I've got an Arizona dealer. I'm going to call the attorney general and say let's enforce this law because there's huge amount of savings and opportunity in enforcing and getting that law being the template across the country." And you know what, I'd encourage dealers in other states to call their state auto association to say, what are we doing on this law?
Mm-hmm.
To talk to NADA. You know, I think NADA is feeling it's like, we've talked about this. Dealers aren't that interested in it. And it's like, dealers need to
It's
be
because
interested in it right now.
they're not educated enough to understand exactly what's going on.
Well, I think if a dealer were to actually understand how much extra money they're paying, is Ryan Everson saying the car dealership tax, um, that they would get interested really fast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if
And
you think about it like this, for a vendor to buy data anywhere, uh, you know, they have to pay a fee, but at the same time, those fees typically get passed on to the dealership, and there's a margin as well. And like if any in the SaaS business, for example, the sort of the gold standard of what a company gets acquired for is 3 times revenue, right? And that the difference in 3 times revenue. So let's say the company makes $10 million a year. 3 times that is $30 million acquisition. That's the purchase price of the company. So every multiple, so if you want 4 times or 5 times or even 12 times whatever your current revenue is, it's all about what your margin is on the product.
yeah.
So if you have a 30% margin on something, then you're probably in that lower territory. But if you got an 80% or higher margin, oh, you're way up there. Your multiples are
Mm-hmm.
huge. And so, what do you think happens if a provider, say, charges $100 per rooftop for a fee? Well, the dealer isn't getting that exact cost passed on in $100. It's getting marked up for that margin that that company has to maintain for shareholders to be okay with it and whatever goals they might have.
You're,
So
you're
it's much higher than you think.
You're you're exactly right. Like, I know as a SaaS company, right? If we have fees that we have to absorb into our software, we have to put margin on them in order to maintain our enterprise value of as a SaaS company. And so the way around that is getting those to be line items. This is a line item. This is not part of the operations, but these certified interfaces, the contract language prohibits that. And so again, it's sort of death by 1,000 cuts. Um, in and light is the greatest disinfectant. It's like, let's shine the light on the problem. Let's look at it. But I think right now what I'm seeing is like so many implementations. Everyone's rushing to implement AI in a variety of ways, and I'm watching it, and it just very much feels like the Home Depot Square. And you're going, wow, like they don't have the data. The strength of AI, the strength of these tools is when you give it the right data. And when you give it partial data, they don't work that well. They just don't. So it's like, and you look at digital retailing. Digital retailing is a failure of data, right? Like
It's
the
funny. I was
data
just thinking
moving.
of the multiples that came for some of those digital retailing companies were
Yeah.
8 times or more. So you think about what kind of margins they were charging.
Yeah, but they weren't. Anybody who's gone through a digital retailing experience has experienced the bad data problem of like the data's not transferring really well, and we're at this point in time where those problems are really easy to solve. We need to wipe away the legal problem, and um, I think the vendors, the CRMs and DMSs are waking up and realizing that hey, we're swimming against upstream here. Let's not swim upstream. I think good things are coming in that space. I think the problem is that like any vendor that's over 5 years old, that's been entrenched in the industry for a long time, has a ton of tech debt. They just do. So like just saying, well, I just want a perfect running API that's just going to deliver everything to me and be super performative. And by the way, now that the Arizona dealer data law has taken out the ability to profit off that, they're not that incentivized to do that. So the solution is going to be the industry needs to open themselves up to allowing integrators to come in and solve that problem. Because those vendors aren't going to solve it on their own.
Dave, will you give just a super high level definition of what you mean when you say tech debt for somebody that might not be super familiar with that from a technologist standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, tech debt's like it's like fixing the plumbing and electrical in your system, right? So it's basically little things that create it. The problem looks easy, like, hey, why can't you just ship this to me? And it's like, oh, it's because it's all in one database, for example. And if we have to hit that database over and over through your API calls, it's going to bring down the server. We don't have enough space to do it, right? It's not distributed. So while the project looks easy on surface, it actually is a much bigger technical project for them to solve it underneath the hood. And so again, like I think that, sometimes we're too hard on those vendors of saying, well, your system's not perfect. I think the problem is when they say we're the only one that can solve the problem, and they stop other vendors from coming in and actually helping solve the problem. That's been the problem in the industry. And so I think that it's a two-part solution. One, it's legal, and I think dealers need to assert their rights a lot more and get a lot more vocal about doing that. I think they'll benefit from that. And on the technical front, I think it's like people like, Jeff, looking at your system and saying, okay, challenge your vendors. Show me, okay, you say you're connected to the CRM. Show me the records and the information you're able to get out of my CRM. Like, show me. And what you'll start to see is these connections are not real. They're the Home Depot square of connections. They're only grabbing this much information, and it's not enough to do the promise of their software. And Alex, I mean, you've alluded to it a little bit with like Frickin' Tech, like you've stayed out of the CRM because you've seen the problems and probably getting data and getting good data out and cleaning it and organizing it and doing it. It's like it's a huge lift. Like I'm really, I'm not to give FourEyes a plug, but I'm excited. Like we just did a big partnership with Outsell where we're allowing, again, the dealer owns the data, but we're allowing them with the dealer's permission, the dealer can say, yeah, I want FourEyes to share the connected data that we have, which is the website, the inventory, and the sales activity data. And so it's made it so, we've spent over $11 million on our system. It's made it so Outsell is not having to spend $11 million to get the same thing and maintain all that architecture. So again, like there's so much opportunity to speed up innovation, but we have to, knock down some of these walls.
Those walled gardens.
Sounds like you're fighting competition. You seem to be a strange advocate for this because of the investments that FourEyes has made to be able to get into that data. What drives you, I guess? What is it about it that is of interest to you? Sorry, guys, I'm asking the question because I don't know. I'm just curious how you think about it.
Yeah, we've gotten this question a lot. Like, why are you on this pedestal? Because it actually, you could argue the other way for FourEyes, that because we've already solved the technological problem, we should just shut up and we should be the one vendor that solved for it and bask in that. I see how much innovation is blocked off. I want a playing field where we're all innovating like crazy. And I believe in our ability to innovate. I'm like, oh yeah, we will be a leader there. But I'm seeing how much time and energy is spent and how much small companies struggle in automotive, and I think it affects churn for all of us vendors, because vendors get so oversold and underpromised, underdelivered, right? Because and it's not, you want to blame the vendor and say, oh, your software didn't deliver. And what no one's talking about is my software was unable to deliver because we didn't have the right access to the data. Like, there are a lot of good ideas right now that are failing for dealerships just because they don't have the access to the data.
So we laid out, or actually, thanks to you, you all laid it out, but we put it in the notes for the episode and in the promotional items. But there's 5 steps that a dealer can take, right? So right now we're on step 1, getting informed.
Yeah.
What are the other steps, and how can they do it? Like, number 2 is conduct a self-assessment. How would a dealer do that?
Well, I think you just described, Jeff, you doing a little bit of a self-assessment with Jeff, right? Like, hey, let's talk about all the software you're buying that's connecting to things. And I think the other way to self-assess is, what are some simple things that I feel I should be able to do that I can't do, right? Like, just ask yourself, what are some of those tasks that take people 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours, where you're like, why does it take so long? Those are usually data problems.
You mean like month-end reporting?
Month-end reporting is a great example. I think there's, Jeff, what are some things where you're like, this is so silly that it takes so long, but they're just tasks that take a huge amount of time?
Well, a lot of times it comes down to reporting.
Yeah. And just pulling the data, cleaning it, and then you have the problem, right? All your reports have an asterisk by them, where you're like, hey, I know we're looking at this, but let's kind of squint a little bit and forgive this number, and this might not be right? Like, those are the reason why it's bad is you're having to be the one to pull and connect data, and you're doing the job that a computer should do, and you're doing it manually, right? Like, that's a good example. I also think, like, just simple things, a lot of marketing stuff gets caught up. I think there's so much efficiency now in understanding communication. Like, one of the things we're looking at now, which is I'm really intrigued by, is we're breaking down all the CRM activity to say, okay, there's 60 pieces of notes on this lead. Most CRM systems would look at those 60 pieces of note and say, there's a lot of activity on this lead. We're now parsing those 60 pieces of activity to say, what's the real outreach on this lead? And what we're finding is pretty shocking, where 50 of the notes are actually not real activity. It's salesperson status update, lead reassigned here. This thing, salesperson leaves a note that's not relevant to actual outreach. Like, a lot of non-outreach. So, like, when I talk about giving the right access to the data, because we have that information, we're now able to build a system that can go out and proactively help the dealer close these deals, because we understand what's being worked and what's not being worked. Because just the status is not an actual indicator, right? You have a lot of leads that are in a healthy, good working status that are not actually being worked. And so, again, like, these types of data issues are very solvable if we just open the doors to allow that data to be shared really easily.
Yep. So if you're going to conduct a self-assessment, again, going back to it, like, would you maybe start and think about which of your vendors are using your DMS data, or pushing data to your CRM, or trying to integrate with the website, and maybe look at that whole web of how much is crossing over at first, just to get a bigger picture?
Yeah, and how much is not. Like, we get so many calls from dealers where they'll say, like, people like how we write notes in the CRM, and they're like, can you give that functionality to these other guys? Because, like, they make us log into another dashboard to see what they did, and I want all that information to be consolidated. And so, like, but the self-assessment, like, when I say conduct a self-assessment, just spend 10 minutes thinking about it. you don't need to spend more than 10 minutes to realize the problem, right? Jeff, how much time did it take you to think about and go, oh shoot, it's real quick. And then I think the next part is go onto our website, read the Arizona dealer data law. It's short, it's easy, it's good reading. It's super readable. It's not like a legalese document. But then, the next question is, you could call a vendor and say, in a perfect world, what data would you have access to that you don't, right? And they won't always be honest because they don't want to necessarily show you their warts. But do other industries have this bad of a problem? So the other industry that's going through it,
for sure.
Healthcare is the other industry that's going through it. And again, in healthcare, we're seeing it affect a lot of really bad outcomes are happening as a result of bad data sharing. It's healthcare and automotive are the two industries that are doing this. Outside of healthcare and automotive, this problem really, even banking has done a much better job opening stuff up where traditionally banking, really wanted to hold it down. And they've kind of changed their tune.
So number 3, connect with others. Is that the your local automotive dealers association?
Automotive Dealers Association, NADA. I think a lot of people there's a lot of people, Alex, I think probably you included, who would say, "Hey, we brought this up years ago, and nobody did anything."
Well, we've been talking about this for 18 years on Dealer Refresh. So, yeah.
Well,
topic, right?
Well,
Only.
But I guess we haven't connected enough dots.
Lasted a little longer, but that might be it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alex.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're failing, obviously, because here we are. Dealer Refresh has been around for 18 years. This topic has come up many times. And we're obviously failing at helping the industry connect the dots to get dealers pissed off enough to do something about it.
Well, and you can see that so one of the reasons why it's so easy to connect the dots right now is the very tools that are part of this sort of new technology revolution rely on nice, clean, complete data. They need complete data. You give them incomplete data, bad job. Complete data, good job. So it's really binary. And so we're going to see it. And, I think the problem with auto dealers is that they don't, because they're insular and they don't necessarily see outside of automotive all the times, they don't understand, this problem shouldn't exist. This is not a typical problem. And my concern is that the OEMs with electric vehicles and going direct a little bit and playing around with Amazon are going to start to go, oh, you know what? These other systems just work better and provide a better experience. They don't work better and provide a better experience. They have access to data right now that auto dealers don't have access to. And so that's and it's in your system. It just can't be tied together. It's like the power of this new technology is that we can link everything together really well and offer great experiences. You got to be able to link your data together. And so I would say, to your point, call your state auto dealer association. Say, hey, what can we do to look more like Arizona? What are we doing? I think if you're a dealer and you even have one dealer in Arizona, you call all your vendors and say, I want you following the Arizona dealer data law.
But they'll love you for that.
Yeah, I mean,
David's about to lose all of his certifications.
You know what I will say, to be fair again, is we've had really positive conversations with a lot of the vendors that you guys are probably laughing at, going okay, I think they're changing their tune. It's in their best interest to change their tune. Mm-hmm. I think
you would think so.
And I think that but they haven't necessarily known how. And that's where I think the other side of it is not holding the tech debt super against them, right? Because especially when you look at the dealer data law and they can't use these as profit centers. Well, it's not going to get the development resources if they can't use it as a profit center. And we get that. That's, good and bad.
That is where the Arizona law could be a little detrimental, because it's saying you can't charge a fee. And I do agree with needing to be able to maintain systems so that access can occur. And I think CDK, their move over to Fortellis, Although, I in some ways could be signaling this. I think they changed the pricing significantly of batch jobs versus real time pools. So the real time pools are much more expensive. The batch jobs are quite reasonable, and so on and so on.
And that's awesome, except for when you say data loses value over time, right? What's a batch job? Not real time, so
True.
less valuable. So it's taking
But it's
the dealer
less technically challenging to maintain a batch than
yeah
real time. So
yeah, and I think the vendors, I don't think this has to be adversarial. I think it has been adversarial in the past. I've definitely been adversarial in the past. I'm learning that there's there's other ways. Like this is about coming together to solve problems for our mutual customers, and I think for the very survival of dealers. I mean, that's where I think uh, the best bet against avoiding disruption is to fix this problem. I think the industry is highly disruptible right now. And I'll tell you how the industry is highly disruptible from the amount of private equity conversations we have where people want to fund disruptors in automotive because of the low satisfaction scores that customers have dealing with dealerships. Right. So we have to fix that problem.
and the
And I
OEMs
believe,
are in that game too.
yeah, and it's a data
Mhm.
problem. That's when people say, why does buying a car suck so bad? I'm like, at the end of the day, it's actually a data problem. Like it's that every interaction you have with a dealership, there's not strong institutional memory of everything else you've done. Like I call the dealership that I've bought my truck from, and they have no memory of me even having owned a truck with them, right? Because it's sitting in the DMS. It's like so. It's an institutional memory problem. It's like if you go to the doctor and they can't pull up your blood work and they can't get access to your records and they're just like, I can't see any of that. Just tell me how you're feeling. That's a bad doctor visit.
But
In
let's go get
2020.
some more blood work again.
Yeah. Let's reorder.
Start over from scratch. Yeah.
Let's start over your blood test, right? So like
Profit.
That happens.
Yep. That is.
the
That's what happens when you go into a dealership too.
yeah,
Pretty much
it's
starting all over again.
every interaction is starting all over again. And so like, and even when we're seeing things like, products that are do a good job moving people from offline to online, it's still building with a Home Depot square, right? It's still a little bit, I like it, but it's not complete. And we can just do so much better. Other industries are doing so much better. Automotive, there's no reason automotive shouldn't be doing better. And again, I think the vendors in the space are gonna. I think I'm excited for NADA because I know that some of the we're having really good talks with some of these vendors that I typically sound like I'm bashing, but they I do think the tides are changing, and so it's like, well, let's help foster that in and let's ride the wave so we can participate in this moment we are in technology.
And Alex, to your point, it's so important for the dealers to know this and embrace it because it's preventing them from having some of those innovations that they would otherwise have. So I think, awareness is key, but then action, we got to follow that up by taking those actions. And that'll be what changes it, makes everything better for everybody involved, including those vendors, because they'll be able to provide products that really meet the consumer's need, and our dealers benefit from that. We all of the vendors in our space rely entirely on our dealers doing well and being successful. If they're not, then we're not by extension. So I think it's a great problem to be aware of and one to take some really steps to stop or to course correct. Maybe is a better way to say that.
Yeah.
I love the square analogy, but I'm not a woodworker at all. But I took enough orienteering as a young Boy Scout to know that if you follow the wrong line, you get further and further and further away from where you were trying to end up. So that's a true story here too. If we don't get, using Dave's analogy, but if we don't get that square figured out and we're not following the right vector, we're going to end up really far away from what our consumers are expecting from us in communication, especially as it is relying on those data sets to power that AI. So, yep.
Look,
I love that analogy.
Both your analogies. I mean, you're referring to a compass. So if your compass is off a little bit, you're
1 degree.
But I mean, that's what we're really talking about here. Is the dealer is only as good as the tools that he gets to use. So,
I've had conversations with friends and family. They'll be complaining about something at the dealership, and now that I recall some of those conversations, I've actually sat down. We'd be discussing it, and I would go into great depth for whatever reason, trying to explain to them that's not the dealership's fault. It's not the dealer's fault. It's the fact that there's so many systems out there. They don't talk to each other. Like what you've been saying, the dealerships just don't have the data available to them either at all or quick enough in order to, offer that level of customer service.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think too, like expectations now are so high for what, people, we all think CSI, like you can just look at the fingerprint and it's just going to zoom in on like, this is the record. And when it's clunky and it takes 6 minutes to sort of reverse engineer someone's experience, that's someone's sitting there fuming. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my big moments that I had years ago, and it totally changed me. And I've told the story a few times, but I think it's like such a good story. Was one of my first NADAs. This dealer out of Florida, Chuck Urban, this is the guy named, I think, Tallahassee Dodge. He sees me and he's like, "Oh, come over here," and he's like, "I got to introduce you to somebody." And he goes, "This guy, his product's great, saved my service department." And I'm thinking, "Oh shit. We don't do anything. We barely do anything in service. He's got the wrong guy. He's got me confused with someone else." and I'm just trying to exit this conversation as quick as I can. He's like, "Oh, tell him about your product. So great. Saved my service department." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah," and so finally I'm like, I got to fess up. He's got the wrong guy. And I'm like, "Hey man, I don't think it's us. We don't do much for your service department." And he goes, "No, because one of the things in your product was you showed how much calls were on hold, actually like just waiting on hold. And you showed it on the service department. And we never had access to that number. And when we saw that number, I knew it was a problem, but I didn't know how big of a problem it was. You showed us that number and you showed us what the average dealership was. So we knew it was a problem. So we worked on it." And I was like, "Okay, great. But how did that save your service department?" And he goes, "So we got it down from, it was over 2 minutes, and we got it down to under 50 seconds. And he goes, a few weeks later, we're having a meeting, and the service managers are like, there is something different in the water. They're like, the service line has been so pleasant the last few weeks." And what they realized was that when they were putting people on hold for 2 minutes and 12 seconds, those people were then coming into the service line and they were like bad apples that were spoiling the whole bunch. And when they fixed that simple problem, when they had the right data to fix that simple problem, that it affected everything. And so that's when to Jeff, to your point, when these like little issues that come up, and like I've experienced it buying a car where you're watching the guy fumble through 13 different screens to get something. You just start to feel like it's amateur hour. You start to question, maybe I am getting ripped off. Maybe he's trying to not show me something. You're just like, your mind starts going, that the customer expects it to be fast. And when it's that slow and that tedious, it causes problems.
It's a cool story. Yeah, I can see how that makes a difference.
Yeah. And it's just, I mean, again, like I had a recent experience with my dealership where it was like calling up. It's the sales guy I know, but it's been a few years, and it's like no memory of me, no and
remember faces, not names.
Sure,
you got to come in.
It's like, it doesn't make me go like, I'm coming back to buy another car from this guy, right? Like, and people want to be, well, that's him, he's not doing a good job. It's like, no, he should have that information in front of him as he's talking to me. It should be very quick and easy.
You're not going to remember every customer.
Yeah.
I know one that's a big struggle is, you were talking about watching the salesperson flip through a bunch of different screens, but your equity mining pieces, talking to the CRM. So many dealerships are using some type of robust equity mining piece that's very hands-on. And you're also talking about the notes and making the notes in that, but then it doesn't correspond to what's in the CRM. I tell you, that alone does cause a ton of issues. especially when it comes down to customer service.
Well, if you have to have a separate dashboard to contact a customer, then you're failing right there.
Yeah, and I think like the line I love that I learned years ago, which is like every great movie is 2 great scenes and no bad scenes. And so what happens is you get these little tiny bad moments, and they're just these little trust erosion. It's like trust is eroding. And so what happens over the time is that it's just like death by 1,000 cuts in your close rate. It's like you're happy you're closing 12%, but you could have been closing 18%. You could have been closing 19%.
Talking about winds of change, but everybody's been talking about this, the post-pandemic lull, where we have to go back and rethink how do we sell a car and what do we do, and road to the sale, and having a car is not, that's not enough to sell a car, post-pandemic. As inventory levels rise, there's a lot of talk around back to basics for salespeople. I think that this conversation relates to that too. They're going to need that data to be accurate in order to reestablish some of those old methods of just communicating with the customer, like making sure that they're doing follow up and doing the things that we all used to do pre-pandemic, and then it changed because of availability. But that's another data story too. You got to have access to that to train correctly against the objectives that they may not be doing proficiently throughout their work.
It's a struggle.
Yeah. Sounds super negative, but it didn't mean it to be. It seems like an opportunity for the dealers that really, embrace that change is happening, and they can address it. There's things that they can do. They're not powerless to do it. Alex, you said and I agree. We've been talking about this since, I don't know, I think the only longer thread might be the QR code thread on the Refresh forums. But what do you think the impetus is for change? David said it already, but it's the AI applications that are going to be powered by that data. What does it take to get dealers to get really excited about this and come together and attack it as an industry-related problem rather than an isolated one? Money. What does that look like? Money? Like making the money real?
I think the simplest way to get a dealer to understand this is to help them understand just how much extra they're spending because of this.
And the
the
real cost of a provider. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like you're just spending $6,000 a month on this, call it a DMS system, month in and month out. There's extra thousands you might be spending in other areas that you weren't aware of.
Jeff, what's that number that would make you change? What would make you sit up and do something about it? Is it $2,000 a month, $5,000? What do you think the average number for that a dealership would actually go, okay, this is a problem worth solving?
Probably depends on the dealership and how big of a dealership it is. But for us, if there was 2,000 there, that would definitely pique quite a bit of interest. Anything above that, it's going to continue.
And I think, and again, like to me, it's not even about the money. It's about the lack of innovation in automotive. And it's about being locked into one or two vendors. And when you're locked into one or two vendors, all of a sudden you're paying $7,000 for something that should cost you $1,500 a month.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a money story there. It seems similar to the, not to be political, but I heard taxation explained this way, that if every Friday when you got your paycheck, you had to pay the tax guy on the way out the door, and that was
it would have bigger impact.
Yeah, you'd immediately go, hold on a minute, right? I think that's the wake up moment that the industry needs around how much back end money is going to these integrations. So
that's a good analogy.
Yeah, getting close to time, but I wanted to mention we're at NADA, so I'm going to have some of these resources that Dave talked about, that one sheeter there. Man, I can't think of a better time while you're there across, face to face with some of the providers to be able to ask them some of these questions and be armed with those resources. If you want them, we'll have them. We're soft plug. We're at booth 5000W, and we'll have those resources for you if you want to continue this conversation or even arm yourself with it as you're walking around. So the other thing I would note, my NADA experience is define the terms, and something I've said in the forums a bunch of times. Having an integration, those words alone don't really mean anything. It's what does that integration include? To Dave's earlier point, like what data do you actually have access to when you tell me you have an integration? So good questions to ask and understand.
One thing I would ask dealers to be cognizant of and respectful of is that there are agreements, legal agreements between your vendors on these integrations where they can't say certain things or talk about certain things. So, definitely ask the questions, but if they're saying, "Hey, look, I can't comment on that," don't press them.
Well, and I think too,
but that's true.
That is very true. Great point. And it's go to where the power is. Ask the questions there, right? Ask the question to the platform that's supposed to be pushing the data, because you're right. Like if a vendor is signed certain agreements, they can't say anything. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
that's not. If a vendor's being prohibited from saying things, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
That's just then your spidey senses should be going off just a little bit.
That happened to me once. I was asking too many questions, and I was told, and it was someone that I knew very well, a friend that was working for a vendor, and there's I can't let you know that information. I'll lose my job. I'm like, what? This was years ago, but I was like,
yeah, and it's I mean, we've definitely changed our tune on what we're willing to sign. I mean, we have things where we're just not willing to sign them because it's like this goes against the spirit of transparency, and we don't want to contribute to that problem. I think that I think that's a really, Alex, very very good point.
Yeah, it might get some stores rethinking whether they force vendors to do certifications or not.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's definitely a myth that a certification is. First of all, there's a myth that certifications are more secure. That is absolutely fundamentally not true. I can show you I can tell you story after story where through secure interfaces we were leaked data or given data we shouldn't have had access to. Where the benefit of using, sometimes when you talk about using a login, the word hostile integration was made up by the auto industry to try to scare dealers into not allowing that. But when you come in through the same door that you're coming through, it's actually significantly more secure because they're not having to build and maintain a separate system. Now, their best in class is APIs. Like, I don't want to say that. Like, we should, we would love to be using secure, robust APIs everywhere. But the idea that the risk in logins is that the dealer forgets you're there, or that the dealer gives you a login and you don't change the password, so that they have there's some dealer, that person gets fired and they have the password, right? So there's like a set of processes that anybody who's doing it should have. But the idea that just because it's a certified interface, it's more secure, no, absolutely not. And I mean, I could go over story after story and show you real names and real data we have had just dropped onto our FTP servers through secure interfaces where it's a dealer we had no business with. And that's because these
some make more mistakes than others.
Yeah, I mean, it's like vendors, all us vendors. This is like the worst kept secret in automotive, right? All us vendors know about this who've experienced it. But the idea that someone's certified, so therefore it's secure and it's right and it's complete, like that's a myth. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. So.
Well, thanks. Oh.
I think the big moral of the story here is obviously dealers. You're informed. The rabbit hole is much deeper than you're hearing. And it really takes you having some one-to-one conversations with some vendors to get a more complete picture. So reach out.
Yeah. And look, I think we're going to see in 2024 dealers are going to start to put agreements in front of their vendors or in front of their vendors that insist on certain data sharing rules. I think when that starts happening, the tides will change. And the same way, look, the same way we've done with data retention, you should have data ownership. And it's only going to help you. It's going to mitigate your risk. The data ownership is also, having unclear data ownership is also a legal risk, right? It's going to create a lot. Anytime there's an issue, everyone's going to start going like this.
Yep. Cram-Leach Wiley. That's
What's that?
Cram-Leach Wiley. It's
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I think getting clarification and just saying let's assert the right ownership and what ownership means. And if you want to see a good template of that, look to the Arizona dealer data law. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for coming on. And this is such a massive subject, a touchy one that affects us all.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you guys. Well, good to see your faces as always. And we'll see you
thanks,
guys
David.
Real soon.
Good seeing you, Ryan.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
good to see you too.
All right.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take care.
Everybody.